Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, hello Phil, how are you doing?
I'm all right. So May's over and done with, well into June now, and I don't know about you, but I still want to jump in and say welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio season, whatever, and the date. And we haven't done that for ages, but 8 years of doing it, you still feel like you need to do it.
I don't think we've done it since January because
I know.
We've got Voiceover Man doing it for us now.
Voiceover Man, yes. He'll like that. He'll be listening this morning. So we've got nice weather. You're going on holiday as well. You're going to benefit from this heat wave, I think, Curtis, because you are actually staying in the UK. So everybody's trying to fly and go away, and they're going over to Spain and places like that with poor weather, I think, at the minute. And you're going to be staying in the UK with all this heat wave that's on its way, I believe.
Yeah, it's about the first time it's ever happened. So looking forward to that.
I bet you are.
Yes. Yeah.
So we've got a few shout outs this week, and I think the first one is obviously we had the debut with Mark Rose, who's MD of Tracker UK, and we managed to get him on as a snippet and a standalone interview last week. And if you've not listened to that, I would urge you to have a listen to the standalone interview there with Mark, and sort of sharing some of the data and insight that Tracker have. And Tracker's obviously a synonymous name that we've known for years, but actually never really thought about some of that data and how that connects with car dealers and dealer forecourt thefts, does it?
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating interview with Mark shedding light on some of the targets of thieves and also some of the tech they use and really how to protect your forecourts against them. So that's an interview that's definitely worth listening to because it'll apply to so many listeners tuning into the podcast today.
Definitely, and hopefully we will get him back on and sort of touch different points of the data that they hold within Tracker and in the future as well. So do stay tuned for those in the future.
And also last week we caught up with Steve Whitten. So if you did miss the show last weekend, it's worth revisiting because he actually launched Wellbeing Winners, which is this new mental wealth accreditation scheme that he's set up in collaboration with eBay Motors Group, and it's offering gold, silver, and bronze accreditation. It's open to all car dealerships sites, and it actually starts with a free consultation. And what Steve's doing is he's offering a special rate to podcast listeners. So check it out in your podcast feed or have a look at the story that AM ran last week or head over to menable.org to just find out more about it and how you can join the scheme and how you can benefit from joining it.
Yeah, and I did catch up with Steve this week, and he, he's already getting people signing up. So do get in there and contact Steve, and he'll certainly look after you. And a name very familiar with listeners of the podcast, Curtis, he's finished his roses. He's finished his garden.
The garden leave is over.
The garden leave is over. 12 months has gone, and you may have, if you are on LinkedIn or social media at all this week, you'd have seen that Dash put that Dash Gupta, ex-Marshall's CEO, is back. We're not sure where yet. He's keeping that very close to his chest, but he did post that he's finished his garden leave, no more pruning, freedom.
Yes,
and I think at the time of us seeing that, I think you saw that it had 900 reactions, 360 plus comments, and counting. And I think it was
and that was within just 2 days. I mean,
and we tried very hard not to sort of ask him where he was going because I think a lot of people were asking that, and it's the obvious question. But as always, if he has got something arranged, then I'm sure he'll be under tight NDA of sharing that, and wherever he's going to go, I'm sure he'll turn to social media, and you will be aware when he does turn up wherever he's going. But he's back in the market. So.
Yeah, but I was amused because both you and I invited him onto the podcast to reveal all exclusively.
And I'm sure we won't be the only ones, but
he hasn't said yes, but there again, he hasn't said no. So if you're listening, Dash, that offer is still open to you.
Yeah, he will be listening. I'm sure we've kept him up to date all the way through the 12 months whilst he's been doing his gardening. I know I'm going to come up with some grief when he does come back on the podcast as well at some point about the references to his garden, his roses, and everything else. But I'm ready for that one, Dash. So as and when. And talk about your holiday, Curtis. So whilst you're away, those that have continued listening to the podcast, you'll be glad to know that I have what we term as the Three Stooges, and that is that myself, Andy Condy, who is group auctioneer for Mannheim, which will be a name recognisable to many listeners this morning, and friend of the podcast, David Billsborough, who's the owner of Cheshire Cars. We're going to return next Saturday and have a chat about all things retail and wholesale, which we try and keep it within 30, 40 minutes. But when
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
When you've got me and Andy Condy and David Billsborough, it's very difficult to get a word in edgeways and to keep it within that timeline. But we will try our very best with that one. But so
I'll be interested to see how you promote it, whether it'll be the Three Stooges or the Three Wise Men.
Yeah, we'll go for Three Stooges.
Yeah, I think so.
So before we talk about the big headlines of the week, and there's a couple of quite interesting ones that we thought we'd share with you at the start of this week's show. And we talk about EVs so much and some of the things that are coming out about electric vehicles as we sort of transition to the EV market. But one that caught our eye this week, and it appeared in the Independent, and you have to at first you think, is this a real story? Is it right? But there's a call now for car park designs to evolve due to heavier battery electric vehicles. And what they're saying is that, many of the multi-story car parks were designed back in the sort of 60s and 70s. And what they're saying is back in the 60s and 70s, when these car parks, these concrete car parks were designed, they were designed for smaller, but also lighter vehicles. And you're talking the early minis that weighed as little as 500 kilos. And what they're saying, and there's basically 10 experts that have contributed to this guidance, saying that some of these car parks will not be able to take the strain of the new vehicles that are coming with the battery electric vehicles. And they cite things like the Kia e-Niro that can weigh up to 2,230 kilograms, so over 4 times the weight of Mini from the 1970s. And this is, I know you wouldn't have guessed this, would you? I mean, it's just...
You couldn't actually make this up.
I had to read the story twice just to make sure that it was right. But this has come from the Institute of Structural Engineers that are calling that for owners of these car parks that they do need to start to look at them, because even the EVQ, the Mercedes, can weigh up to 2,921 kilos, so nearly 6 times the weight of a Mini that these car parks were built at the time. So what are your thoughts on that one, Curtis?
Well, you know what, Phil? I've got a solution. Just allow them to park on the ground floor. No problem.
Yeah. I mean, we all know now. Going
EV
into car
drivers,
parks.
EV drivers will be delighted. So let's an easy way to solve it. I saw this story, and like you, it did baffle me a little. Bearing in mind, a lot of these old car parks from the 60s and 70s are made in that sort of brutalist style.
Yes.
And there is so much concrete. I mean, they are just made of concrete. And really, can they not withstand the weights? Well, no, maybe not.
I don't know. Yeah, it's one of them. I mean, you can't get your cars in these days anyway, can you? You've got anything of a decent size that's new, any bigger, large SUVs, then majority of the time you won't be able to get into half of these car parks with the pillars and the smaller car parking spaces anyways, whether it's battery electric or not battery electric. But yeah, I thought that caught our eye, and it does actually cite the other story of the week, which is from Rowan Atkinson, that has been hit across the headlines all week, not necessarily positively either, because
No, he's got a lot of flack.
he's got a hell of a lot of flack, because he's spoken out towards EV, and he's saying that he said that he felt duped by the green claims about electric vehicles. But you and I know, Rowan Atkinson is very much a petrol head, isn't he?
He
He's not an
is,
EV
yeah.
man.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's well known that how much he loves cars. He's got an amazing collection, a lot of performance cars, and as you say, he's not a fan of EVs. And I think he cites the sort of environmental benefits, doesn't he, or sort of questions them.
Yeah, he questions them, really, saying, how true are the EVs in terms of that decarbonisation and the environmental benefits, and talks whether hydrogen is the better solution and stuff like that. But he's very much outspoken about his view on the transition to electric vehicles. But I think he has come a lot of flack, because he is, as I said earlier, he's very well known for being a petrol head. And he does rallies and all sorts of stuff, doesn't he? He's
He
quite
does,
heavily
yeah.
involved in cars.
And I was amused at the photograph that was used in some of the coverage, because it was him as Mr. Bean sitting on top of his Mini driving it, if you remember that scene.
We do, yeah.
Yeah. So you're not going to take this story that seriously after seeing that particular photograph.
No, so do check out that. I mean, you just need to Google Rowan Atkinson electric vehicles, and it's everywhere. We put the story in the Guardian this week, and the one with reference to the car parks is in the Independent. So if you do want to check those out, check those stories out. Quite amusing, just to start this week off.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
Headlines this week come from AM, Motor Trader, Car Dealer, and Motor Trade News. New car registrations up 16.7% in May as fleets continue to drive the new market. LCV registrations up 15% in May as BEV demand increases. Netherlands-based van Mossel supergroup makes first UK acquisition, as exclusively hinted at on this podcast only last month. Franchise dealers urged to rethink part exchange strategies or risk losing their lunch to specialist online buyers. Half of dealers think Chinese EVs will push out existing OEMs. And finally, this week, Peter Vardy Group appoints high-profile industry leader as its new COO. So plenty of headlines there to chat about, Phil.
Just a few there,
Yeah.
Curtis. So and quite a mix there as well. But we are going to start off with the new car registration. So we obviously eagerly await the results each month for this. But the month of May, we're covering it in AM Online. The month of May finished on 16.7% up. And that was up to 145,204. But the private market did drop again slightly by 0.5%. And fleets are obviously, the headline does refer to it, that fleets are obviously driving the growth with a 36.9% increase for the month of May. So a lot happening in that new car market at the minute, isn't there, Curtis, in terms of some of these figures? And alternative fuels, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles are obviously the main point of discussion in these figures as well.
Yeah, definitely. So the latest figures show that 145,000 new cars were registered over the course of the month. And as you say, that was an increase of 16.7%. Worth looking at year to date. So for the first 5 months of the year, the new car market is actually up 16.8% to 772,454 units. And that compares with just over 661,000 units last year. So, some encouraging signs here, albeit below those pre-pandemic levels. I think this particular story mentions that it's 21% under those pre-pandemic levels. But having said that, it's heading in the right direction, and certainly driven by fleet, as you mentioned. And it's worth looking at battery electric vehicles in particular, because they saw significant growth over the course of the month. Registrations were up 58.7% to 24,500 units. And if you look at year to date, standing at 121,268 units, and that compares with 92,500 last year. So that's up 31.1% year on year in the year to date. And battery electric vehicles, they are the second biggest fuel after petrol, but by a long way now.
Yeah, definitely, and you see that in terms of that market share. Diesel now accounting for 4% market share in 2023, so down from 5.8% for the same period year to date last year. Petrol 42.4%, down from 43.7% last year, and battery electric up from 14% up to 15.7% in terms of that market share, followed very closely with mild hybrid vehicles at 14.7% for petrol hybrid there. So a lot happening, but I think the key with this is that private versus fleet and business. Business now in terms of fleet is up to 398,000 year to date, and that's a 38.6% growth year to date. And accounting for 51.5% market share compared to last year, that 43.4%. So you can see that shift now, where it's gone from that dominance of private OEMs pushing towards that private market. Year to date last year was at 54.2%, and it's dropped down to 46%. So, this shift now that the market is going back to that fleet and business sector around those channels opening again now. So, that will hopefully start to sort of open up the wholesale supply chains as these vehicles start to get defleeted off the fleets. Those extensions, those contract extensions that we know have been happening through longer lead times and back into the wholesale market. So one that we're trying to keep a close eye on at the minute.
Yeah, and a trend that we've been expecting to see for a long, what seems like a long time now. The in terms of the top 10, the makeup is actually quite interesting, because it is pretty much dominated by crossovers and SUVs. Now, I'm sort of conscious of the fact that we've got a lot of headlines to squeeze in, so I'll give you a top 5, Phil. So number 5, Audi A3. Number 4, Vauxhall Corsa. Number 3, the Vauxhall Mokka. Number 2, the Nissan Qashqai. And the highest selling car over the course of May was the Ford Puma at number 1, with 4,184 units registered.
Yeah, and they're actually the highest in terms of year to date as well.
Yeah.
So Ford Puma seems to be pushing that marketplace, and the Tesla Model Y does appear in 7th position in the year to date. And just very quickly before we move on to the vans, in terms of the European market, just to give a bit of a comparison there, Germany was up 19.2% in May to 247,000. Italy up 23.1% to just over 149,000. France up 14.8% to 145,500, and Spain up to just 92,000 units, so up 8.3%. So not quite happening at that double-digit recovery over in Spain for the month of May.
Next headline is from Motor Trader, and it's LCV registrations up 15.3% in May as battery electric vehicle demand increases. So registrations for the month were 25,359 units. And the SMMT points out this represents the 5th consecutive month of growth, with the market very much rebounding from what was a pretty tough year in 2022. And that's all down to supply chain challenges continuing to ease. So we're getting these vehicles through now. And in terms of registrations in the year to date, we're still looking at 13% below those pre-pandemic levels of 2019. So heading in the right direction, but still a long way to go. And just focusing in on BEVs, because I mean that
It's a
really
big
is.
topic for fans, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it certainly is. So registrations were up 19.7% in the month, which sounds a lot, but that equates to 1,041 units. And the SMMT points out this represents around 1 in 24 new vans. But rising demand means that just over 7,000 electric vans have been registered in the year to date. That's an increase of 15.5%. And a stat that interested me in the press release, I don't know if it's covered in this particular story, but the SMMTs say that there are now more than 25 electric van models available in the UK. So that figure has certainly grown over the last 12 months, and we will see that grow even more now.
Yeah, I mean, it is a significant growth area, and we know there's a lot of effort, a lot of input going into that battery electric vehicle market for the commercial vehicle for obvious reasons, in terms of that last mile inner city vehicle movement and deliveries and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a slow start, but at least the volumes are all going in the right direction, and it's all positive news. So heading back over to AM Online, and as Curtis alluded to there with the exclusive there that came from the interview with Steve Young from ICDP on our monthly catch-up with him, that AM100 Car Dealer Group acquired by Netherlands-based Van Mossel. Now, many listeners may not have heard of this business. I mean, they're a reasonably sized business. Either, I suppose both in many ways. One, Jackson's, in terms of being over in Isle of Man, Jersey, and Guernsey. That was at one point a family business. Then it was bought out. But two, with Van Mossel, that I think they've got about just over 350 and rising dealers across Europe, employ over 5,000 employees, and as it says, they're a Netherlands-based business. And they've taken this Jackson site on, but what this does do, it takes on 29, and you heard me correctly, 29 automotive brands that are represented in what you determine as the Channel Islands, with Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Wight. Even I do forget Isle of Wight, as well as the Isle of Man. So this is quite an interesting acquisition. From Van Mossel's perspective, it gives them a significant increase in the brands that they now represent. We're taking the whole business from Jackson's, but it also gives them franchise agreements that are basically, not necessarily UK mainland franchise agreements, but definitely UK based franchise agreements. And it's a very interesting move, this, Curtis, when you look at the story behind it.
It is definitely, and as you said, Steve Young from ICDP did actually mention this pretty much in passing when we were talking to him just a couple of weeks ago, because we came back and asked him, didn't we? There's going to be a major acquisition, so we knew that Van Mossel were looking at a UK group. And interestingly, within this story, it's revealed that the negotiations have actually gone over a significant period of time. So there's been a long gestation for this one, and it is fascinating, isn't it, that it is chosen its first UK acquisition as a sizable group that doesn't actually operate on the mainland, because it does operate across the islands that you mentioned. And yes, they got 29 brands, and what it does mean that there'll be some new brands to the Jackson's portfolio, including Aston Martin, BMW Motorrad, Honda Motorbikes, Lexus, Mini, Porsche, and Toyota. And as you say, Van Mossel, it's actually one of the biggest dealer groups in Europe. It's in the top 20 by size, and it already represents 34 brands. So this is a particularly well chosen acquisition because they've already grown a territory and they've grown representation. And we're going to be hearing an awful lot more from Van Mossel, aren't we, over the coming months?
For definite. I think
this is a foothold, isn't it?
Yeah, this is. I mean, being a betting man, I think this is their first move, and I think you'll see where, we talk about other international, global, European businesses looking at the UK as Steve Young said. It's still a very attractive proposition for some of these operators for the UK market. So you kind of see that, I think they'll be very quickly looking at opportunities within mainland UK of where they can start to take on some of these brands that they've got in the Channel Islands there into mainland UK now. So it's going to be very interesting. But again, they don't have FCA regulations on those islands, so it's an entirely different business. And I hear where businesses do go over to the Channel Islands and Guernsey and Jersey and those markets to test systems and to test things where they're outside of UK FCA regulations. So it's a very different marketplace, but very unique in the same instance.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So the next headline comes from Motor Trade News, and it is dealers urged to rethink part exchange strategies. So this is based on some research that was done by a friend of the podcast, Neil Adley from Judge Service. And I actually worked with the guys at Judge Service on this. So I've seen the data. The data is actually from their State of the Nation survey, which is their big annual report, which is coming out at the end of the month. But this is a kind of sneak preview of some of the data they've got. So within the piece, Neil is saying, when it comes to trading in time, most car owners actually say that they will use the franchise dealer they plan to buy their next car from to get a part exchange valuation. But what actually happens in practice is that many end up selling to some of these specialist buying platforms that have emerged over recent years if they find a better price. And I think what's particularly interesting in this story is that buyers would rather just have the single transaction. They would rather part exchange and buy from the same dealer. They don't want the hassle of looking elsewhere, but they will if they can get a better price. So what Neil is saying in support of this data is that there's an opportunity here for franchise dealers to just up their game and capture and retain more of those part exchanges.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? And I've got to be careful what I say, without offending anybody. It's kind of, these car buying operations. That's what they do. They focus on everything on their platform, everything around their social marketing is focused on buying consumer cars.
Yeah.
And is that the lesson that many of the franchise dealers need to start to think about? Where actually we need this vehicle, we need this part exchange. It's a significant area, and back in the day, you were looking at a 70% part exchange, but now I think the reports are that's more they're down to the sort of 30, 40, 50% mark in terms of those part exchange volumes. So significant drop off and a significant loss in those vehicles that are not coming into the business. So the dealers and some of the good operators I speak to, they do look at it and go, actually, this is where we need to focus our investment. This is where we need to focus our time, because that is our product, that is our stock that we need to buy, and not miss out to these competitors in that space. So, it's a difficult one, but I suppose Neil's asking the question: is that an area that you do need to spend a little bit more time and investment on?
Yeah, because he makes the point that that sort of traditional old style motor trade practice of trying to nick the PX, it doesn't hold water anymore, because there are alternatives. In the past, the customer was pretty much stuck with the valuation that was given, which was obviously gave the dealers more leverage. But there's competition now, and also dealers actually want those vehicles, whereas in the past they wouldn't necessarily have wanted them. They would have traded them out. So they were sort of unwanted part of the transaction, but they're very much core now. So it's a case of just being a bit more sophisticated, a bit more competitive as well, and trying to capture more of those PXs with possibly better pricing.
And these car buying businesses are now, they are proactive. It's not kind of, you're not going onto a platform, getting a price and move on. These car buying businesses will do follow-ups. They will increase bids. They'll phone, Mr. and Mrs. Smith and go, do you know what do you think of that price? And they'll go, well, I've got a little bit better. I'm thinking about what if we give you a bit more money? They're actually prospecting and following up these customers now. So it's not kind of a one hit, that's it. It's a very competitive market space within that market. And sticking with motor trade news, and 2 stories this week. So half of dealers think Chinese EV brands will push out existing OEMs. Now, this has created lots of conversation this week across the sector for obvious reasons in terms of the analysis and output from this. But we did chat before the show, didn't we, Curtis, and questioned some of this from history when these kind of things have happened previously.
Yeah, because you and I go back a long way.
Unfortunately, yes.
I can trace my start in the automotive sector to, well, in fact, it's 30 years ago, around about now. Because when we were talking earlier, I remember when the Japanese brands came over here in numbers, and then that was very much the sort of 70s, 80s, and the Korean brands in the 80s and 90s. Was there any fallout? And this was what we were discussing. Did we lose any manufacturers as a result of that? Well, we didn't. We didn't back then. But I think it's different now in the sheer number of potential Chinese EV brands heading this way, and competing on price with some of the existing OEMs.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, 35 years in 35 years in the
trade. Oh, you're 35.
Right, there you go. Yeah, it's not something to shout about, Curtis. Started at a very, very young age.
I can imagine.
But yeah, I think you look at and more familiar to many through that the financial crash when some of the Kia Hyundai benefited in terms of growth. They came into the market, they came in with a very low entrant point proposition, very good value to the buyer, and then look at where they are today, and Kia obviously dominating in that marketplace alongside obviously Hyundai there. But you sort of look here, and I referred to it I think it was last week, Curtis, when we talked about these, and I try not to use Chinese new entrants because it's not just the Chinese, but you look at that BYD and you look at the Seagull vehicle that has been launched at I think it's $11,300 equivalent to in terms of value. It's a super mini Fiesta size EV that charges in 30 minutes from 30% to 80%. 252 miles on a charge, that will be coming to the UK shores in Q3, Q4 of this year for sub £15,000. Now,
and that's the key, isn't it? It's that sub 15,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of where does that market sit? What does that do to the legacy operators? Is that one of the reasons that your Mercedes, your JLR, and others are moving more into that premium market, so they don't have to fight in that lower end market around EVs? What does that do to buying a 2-3-year-old electric vehicle when you can walk into a showroom and buy a brand new, no worries, latest technology battery electric vehicle that do 250 miles on a charge? do you care who the manufacturer is? And there are many surveys at the minute that talk around that sort of brand loyalty towards electric vehicles isn't as strong as previously on combustion. So the market's changing, but we also know there's a lot being done by all these OEMs. You look at just the latest one with Tesla and Ford over in the US in terms of shared charging network and shared apps and things like this. There's a lot happening, and I think we've got to be careful not to underestimate some of these legacy OEMs that they will shift, they will change, they will evolve, but it's different again, isn't it? It's I don't know, we're not quite sure yet.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. It's we're going to have to see how this one plays out. But some of those established brands that they are looking a little vulnerable in that they will lose market share, and they're reinventing themselves as EV brands. But a lot of these new brands are very much EV focus. It's
Yes.
all they do. They might do ICE in other markets, but they're looking at Europe purely with EVs.
No, and I think generally, I think the OEM space will change with and without the new entrances from China coming into the marketplace. I think some of these OEMs will be looking at their through, as not just a consequence of the pandemic in terms of that production throughput, but there'll be many looking at, we saw Mitsubishi exit the UK for different reasons. It wasn't through competition. It was different reasons. And you may see some of those Stellantis brands might start to change. You just don't know what's happening at that high level OEM space. And I don't know whether they will exit or they'll lose market share as a pure result of these new entrances coming in, but it's certainly going to shake the market up significantly going forward.
So, final story this week is from Car Dealer, and the headline is former Inchcape boss James Brearley appointed COO of family-owned car dealer Peter Vardy Group. So, there's the welcome return of James Brearley. So this was announced. It actually coincides, interestingly enough, and I assume this is coincidental with Peter Vardy Group's 17th anniversary, because I noticed they took to social media at the beginning of the week, and they've been celebrating their 17th birthday. So James Brearley would be a familiar name to many listeners for his time at Inchcape, which he led from 2017 to 2022. And before that, of course, as MD of Stratstone, Pendragon's Stratstone division.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting move, this one, and Cardiel have covered it, and there is a story that went in the Times as well. But I think there's you can see. I mean, we talked about Peter Vardy a lot recently. With the acquisition of the ex Kazoo site, it's further expanding their supermarket side of the business. They've entered Australia with the car money financing stream of their business as well. So you can see where things over the recent years with Peter Vardy's and diversifying the business, expanding the business. It may be that they just need that stronger leadership team now, starting as they grow bigger and bigger and enter different marketplaces and enter international markets through different channels. That actually, James has got that international experience from Inchcape. He obviously led the UK division of Inchcape, but he was part of that bigger Inchcape global business, as we know. So maybe it is that has brought him there. So I think it's a great move for Vardy. It's a great move for James there to be entering Peter Vardy. So I'm sure it's one that many will be watching to see of what he does, what he implements within Peter Vardy's going forward.
Yeah, and there were a couple of points in the story that interest me, because Peter Vardy, you mentioned about James Brearley's experience with distribution whilst at Inchcape. Well, Peter Vardy actually mentions his experience in distribution. So I wonder if that's a key to future plans, bearing in mind that there are new brands coming on stream in the UK. But also, James Brearley mentions that this this new position means that he'll be working with a lot of the brand partners that he's worked with in the past. But he also hints at exploring mutually beneficial solutions for other OEMs. So I think this is also where the growth is going to come from. It's new partners to the group.
Like you say, I mean, James brings a wealth of experience. He also brings a wealth of connections at that OEM space. And as you say there, with the previous story with the Chinese new entrants, they are mainly looking at UK distribution partners, looking at partnerships rather than direct to the market. So maybe that's where James's experience with Inchcape will stand stead for Peter Vardy's going forward. So I'm sure it won't be the last we hear about this. And we have invited both James Brealey or Peter Vardy onto the podcast at an open offer to come and talk about what's happening in the space of Peter Vardy's going forward. So that's it for this week then, isn't it? I mean, hopefully we've covered a lot of subjects there, Curtis.
Yeah, just one or two, haven't we?
Yeah. So a lot going at me, and there's a lot of other stories. There's been finance announcements this week and performance finance updates, all sorts of things going on, and so do head over to the main trade media platforms that we've mentioned there. You will get the newsletter with all the links to these stories on Monday morning, as usual. And it remains to say, have a fantastic week off, Curtis. So well deserved, and I'm sure you'll be looking forward to sitting in the sun with a G&T in your hand and relaxing, listening to the Stooges next Saturday.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. Honestly, I am really looking forward to that. But yeah, no, I'm off on holiday soon. But that's all for this week. Many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. As we said, until next week when Philip's back with a used car special, along with special guests Alan Condy from Mannheim and David Billsborough from Cheshire Cars. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio Podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.